Everybody, happy hump day. Sorry for the delay, some technical doodahs this morning. Welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox, and today I'm joined by my fellow Mirror columnist Darren Lewis. Morning, Darren.
Morning. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Now, this is the People's Paper Review, remember, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. The best ones do get a news agenda mug. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on news that BP has declared a £10 billion profit just days after we were all told to pay 50% more on our energy bills. To add insult to injury, we've also revealed almost £500 million, 493 million quid in tax rebates to BP, which means effectively that the firm's North Sea business has not paid any corporation tax in years. Now, Darren, I had to double check, because the Mirror informed me today that the name of BP's chief executive is Bernard Looney. It does sound like the mathematics of the asylum, this. What possible reason could there be to give a £10 billion firm a tax break?
Yeah, self-awareness doesn't really come in a huge supply at BP. And in a way, I'm glad we've led with this in our front page as well, because it really does make my blood boil, and imagine millions of people around the country as well, because we're having to choose, millions of people are having to choose between heating and eating. And these guys, not only do they give themselves these big bonuses, but the rhetoric as well is so poor, from Bernard Looney, from Murray Auchincloss, who's the finance guy at BP. And he's been saying we've got more money than we know what to do with, hence the headline on the front page.
You poor devils!
I know. How are you going to cope? And, you know, the serious aspect of this, of course, is that you've got 1 million kids, school kids, who are going hungry, and a crisis of people going to supermarkets and having to decide what they can buy and what they've got to leave behind. And all sorts of problems around their country with this crisis, cost of living crisis. And yet we've got these guys who are showing a complete lack of self-awareness.
Yes. Now, Jen Gilchrist says that's absolutely disgusting. You're right, Jen. Now, the argument from BP's side of view and the Treasury is that the reason they gave this tax break is that it is a rebate to encourage firms to hit certain targets to do well. So they are getting paid or getting a rebate, for example, if you decommission a very old oil rig, if you clean up some stuff that you've left lying around, things like that. And that in turn protects jobs in the North Sea. But on the other perspective, if you've got £10 billion profit, you should be cleaning up your own goddamn mess, BP. We shouldn't have to do it for you. Now, and all this comes as we've really after just days after Shell announced that I'm trying to move out of the lights from my blind so it doesn't confuse me. After Shell announced a £14 billion profit. So Labour has been demanding a windfall tax on big energy firms like these. Of course, BP's saying that would mean they couldn't afford to invest. They'd be down to the last few billion. If you took 5 billion off BP, they've still got 5 billion. Anyway, however,
Rishi Sunak's been making that case that if you did impose the windfall tax on the big energy companies, then they wouldn't invest. But again, that's just showing that such a tone-deaf response to the stories that we're telling in our paper today about people who are struggling to live, not to dine out on luxuries, but to live. And you mentioned a second ago Shell's profits, they're the highest for 8 years. So as far as, and so it's not just BP, it's a number of the big energy companies who are raking in the profits, but are basically saying to you and me, your bills have to go up, in some cases as much as £700. I know there's one particular family in our paper, our colleague Matt Roper's spoken to her, and her bills are going to go up by just under half. That's outrageous when you consider the money that is swilling around with these big guys. We've had Ed Davey from the Lib Dems, and we've had, I think it was Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, basically saying, look, we're talking about basic fairness here rather than anything else, because you can't be seen to be making these huge profits while people are scared to turn their radiators on. And they're absolutely right.
Yeah, of course. And Jason says, we need to bring the country to a halt. BP are doing that for you, Jason. Honestly, you don't need to go off the sofa, mate. We're being absolutely screwed in taxes by this Tory government. The tax burden is the highest it's been since the Second World War. And this is supposed to be the party, the government, of fiscal responsibility and seeking value for taxpayers' money. Don't seem to have much of that. But here's a tip for Rishi Sunak. If you're watching the show, Rishi, if you think that taking money off BP means BP can't invest anymore, what do you think happens if you take all the money away from the people who are the customers for BP? Because eventually BP's just got all the money, right? We've got none left. And that's not sustainable. It can't carry on forever. Now, Rishi is siding with BP and saying that a one-off tax wouldn't be a good idea. But Gordon Brown did a windfall tax when he was in office, and the people he taxed, I can't remember what it was now, I don't know if it's energy or something else, but they're still here. They're still employing people. They're still making a profit for themselves. It was a one-off tax because of a strange situation. And the situation we're in is that the energy companies didn't make very much in the last 2 years of the pandemic. They've posted some losses in some cases. Now they're trying to make it all back again. On the upside, when they pay out dividends to their shareholders, a lot of that is pension firms. And so it does go back into people's pockets to some extent. But of course, you haven't got a private pension. It don't really affect you in the same way. But the French are having a windfall tax to keep bills down, Darren. There's a lot of economists saying that this is a sound fiscal policy, a reasonable, quick sting in the tail for BP and Shell and the likes of them in order to help customers through this and keep their customers able to pay the companies, which of course is what they need in the long term. Why, as Reece says, why aren't they doing it?
Well, it is indefensible. I mean, part of the argument was that the energy companies were saying that it wouldn't solve the big energy crisis that we've got at the moment. And I know nothing about low carbon energy, etc. But the argument goes that the major investments are needed in low carbon energy sources to help secure energy supplies, and they've got to be clean and affordable too. And listen, for my money, what it is, it's rich people. Let's not forget Rishi. He's got quite a bit of money. Well, exactly.
My mum didn't know that. I told you, I said, he's got more money than the Queen. She said, you never. I said,
absolutely. Absolutely.
That man has never been £1.50 short at the till and had to put stuff back on the shelf, right? I have. You probably have, Darren. Most people watching this at some time have gone, you know what? I can't today. That's it. We can't do that. And he's
And I
never
think,
in that situation. He's going to be.
this is the point. I think you have to have been in a situation where you've been at the till and you've had to think about what it is you need to put back. What can you cope with least, or rather cope without, if you like, to understand what ordinary people are going through and what ordinary people think of the fact that you, a banker, your other half, who's not exactly short of a few bob either, you guys are keeping the other rich guys in the kind of financial custom that they're used to. And I think that when you're making very cogent arguments for tax breaks and for easing the burden on ordinary people, that the kind of people Rishi Sunak wants to appease are not really interested in. I don't even think Rishi Sunak is interested in that. I think he just knows that when he stays, maintains the position that they are able to enjoy, then they are able to say to him, yes, we'll give you our backing.
Yeah, it just makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why on earth a hedge funder who had so much money wanted to be in government? Now, we've got a comment from Paul Hudson. The usual Tory mantra, the rich get richer and richer while the people get poorer and poorer. Anyway, it's time to turn the heating off. I turned mine off for an hour yesterday because I suddenly realised that firstly, it was warm enough outside. It didn't need to be on all day. And secondly, I just went, well, it's on for too long. Now it needs to come down a bit.
You know that whole point, though, Susie. I mean, even some of the people we've talked to in the Daily Mirror, not only are they having to turn their radiators, they're worried about having to turn their radiators off, but also they're worried that although the heating has gone up, there could still be a cold snap, and they don't know when that might come. And so there is that still that concern. You know, I thank God that I'm in a position where I don't have to worry about that, but I'm very, very mindful of the many people that do, that has to be at the back of their minds. And I think that's the reason why we've done as much as we have as a paper and will continue to do more, because this isn't just something that goes away in the spring. This is an ongoing concern for millions of people around the country.
Yeah, and while we're heading into the spring now, things may improve when the energy price cap kicks in. We start paying these because our energy bills, our heating bills, will go down in the spring, of course. But in the winter, when all this bit has been forgotten and the massive profits of BP and Shell have been forgotten to some extent, it's all going to kick in again when we have to start paying more for our heating in the winter. Now, as a comment from Kerry Bow, she says, surely something has to be done with these big companies making all this profit and gloating to the world. That's the bit that really stinks, isn't it? About how much they've made while a majority of people are suffering with whether to feed or keep themselves warm. Have I woken up in the Victorian times? No. Kerry, inequality is I think someone a little while ago found that inequality is the gap between the richest and the poorest is bigger than it was in Victorian times. It's actually worse. So the haves and the have-nots are further and further apart than they've ever been. I keep asking us your questions. Have you had problems? Are you going to have problems making the heating come on? Or how are you going to cope? What are you going to do to cut costs? Because you bet your bottom dollar BP isn't going to. But elsewhere, some energy firms are offering advice to customers about not using electricity at peak times. They're saying, don't put the kettle on in the middle of Coronation Street. Don't switch everything on in the Home Office at 9 a.m. But people can't not use electricity at times when everyone needs to use it, just because it's inconvenient to the power companies. And part of that is because our power infrastructure has aged, collapsed, disappeared, been switched off and not replaced by these companies because they were taking the profits out of the system and not putting it back in the right amount. So we don't have the infrastructure to sustain some of these problems. Now, when people are already observing self-imposed power cuts, Darren, aren't they, to save money? This just isn't sustainable because, like I said, eventually BP has all the money, or Shell, or whoever. They've got all the money, and you can't keep bleeding your customers because eventually the customers have no money left or they are all dead. Right?
I think on top of that, Susie, I think there's something quite insulting as well about the companies raking the money and swimming in all of this money, awarding themselves bonuses, and then waving their finger at ordinary people and saying, you are not doing enough. You are not being sensible enough. You know, people who already are working out ways to keep themselves warm, to keep their kids fed, to balance the household bills, the utilities, all of the other things. And the company's basically lecturing them and patronizing them and telling them that they are not doing enough. They are not doing well enough. There's something very insulting about that for me. And again, it underlines what you were saying before. We live under a regime that doesn't care about ordinary people. It cares about keeping the people who will maintain their power base in power and making sure those people are able to enjoy the financial benefits of their positions as well. That's why Sunak will continue to defend them. And that's why we are powerless to change the status quo until around about 2024.
Well, until there's an election, yeah. Now, Kelly says the heating's been off since being moved over to E.ON and getting a £500 plus bill, I assume, following Igloo going bust. It's silly to have to live like this. Then I don't even get a 1% pay rise. So how am I supposed to afford this as well as other rises? This is the point, Kelly, is that eventually the customer's been bled and there is nothing left within the stone. That's it. It's dry. So the companies and the government can't sustain this position forever. You might be able to sustain it for a year or two, but eventually, if you're the person trying to get blood out of the stone, you have to realize it's just a stone. So how long can this go on, Darren? How long really can they actually, it has to come a point where this stops.
Well, you say that, but you could apply that to many, many other things. You know, we've got NHS waiting bills. They've already told us, Sajid Javid told us just today, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And the soonest we might get any kind of easing of the lengthy waiting bills is around about 2024. 2024. These targets are basically geared towards easing the burdens in 2024. So we're all getting sicker. We're all not able to pay our way on a day-to-day basis anyway, but obviously then we've got to worry about treatments and the government don't appear to care. The government tell us one thing, as we know in the wider context. I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but I think all of the different things are interlinked. The government hasn't cared about us for a long time, so they tell us to do one thing and they go and do another. They live in one kind of lifestyle, don't really care about the people who are suffering. We go to the government and say, look, kids are going hungry, and members of parliament vote against measures to feed kids. So when we ask how long this can go on for, I think it will go on as long as this regime is in power. They simply do not care about the kind of stories that you are telling on a day-to-day basis, we are telling on a day-to-day basis, and most importantly, our viewers are telling us on a day-to-day basis. They simply don't care.
No, well, they don't care because they've never experienced it, and they don't have normal empathy. I don't begrudge people in high positions having wealth. I kind of begrudge them forgetting what it's like not to have it. Now, Kevin Baker O'Hare is going to quick switch to another story. Speaking of regimes, is Boris still employing the Trump playbook? His political death throes are concerning given what happened to Starmer and Lammy. It does look a bit like the Prime Minister, Darren, is aware that the end times are coming, if not actually arrived in his grasp on power, and he is lashing out. He is doing things that are dangerous. He is accusing people of being, forgiving of paedophiles, and that is leading to mobs in the street. To be fair, those mobs have previously attacked Anna Soubry of the Conservative Party, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Michael Gove, but as well as David Lammy and others. And they seem to be just attacking everybody. Fundamentally, they're Nazis. They just don't like anyone. But are we seeing something which is going to lead, as it did in America, perhaps to discussions about stolen elections or a march on Westminster or something like that? Because we have more faith in our electoral system in this country than they do in the States. They always think the government's trying to steal stuff off them in the States. We don't have quite the same attitude. Can Boris really lead us the same way?
Yes, I think he's trying to. I think he's following the same playbook. You're right to make the distinction, or rather to remind people that it isn't just Labour politicians who have been attacked by mobs, but the most important aspect of it, the most important point to make is that he appears not to have learned from those situations. He appears not to have learned from Joe Cox and David Amess and all of the situations where politicians, where it's ended the worst way. And I think the two are slightly separate in so much as we know Boris Johnson has this method that he's even boasted about of throwing dead cats on the table when he's under pressure, doesn't really care about the consequences of them. And subsequently, he has succeeded because everyone's ended up talking about Savile, the impact, the words, the mobs, Starmer, and all of those things. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, was on TV this morning talking about having 5 people outside the TV studio, armed police waiting to take him into his car because he was worried about people being outside. So all of that is
got detachment of coppers watching him, isn't it?
Well, exactly, and that's on the one side, but on the other side, alongside that, you have Boris Johnson, who's already prorogued Parliament, who's already tried to rewrite the rule book when colleagues have been found guilty of misconduct, who's basically dismissed the inquiry into Priti Patel that found her guilty of bullying in the workplace. There are so many things that Boris Johnson has basically stuck a metaphorical middle finger up at, basically. I was trying to use different, maybe more different language.
Another word, actually, is like to the Mother of Parliaments as well. We have to see how that one pans out. Now, Serena Andrews, she says, how condescending for companies to post how not to use energy. What do they expect us to do? If you didn't use energy, those companies would also be cross at you, because they won't be making any money. So they don't want you to use too much, but they want you to keep paying them. So it's a stupid situation to be in. Now, Rob says, is the angry state of UK politics now being reflected in wider society? High cases of football fan violence are being reported. How long before frustration in our Prime Minister boils over into disorder? Let's not try and encourage it, Rob. And let's hope it doesn't happen. And hopefully Britain is a different country to the United States of America. We do have some of the same problems, and we do have some of the same sort of connections with QAnon and the conspiracy theorists who are over here. A lot of those people who are around Westminster with all their live streams and so on are connected to those in America, and they are crowdfunding and they're getting paid to do this by people elsewhere. And if MI5 is watching, please, for goodness sake, you're busy infiltrating hippies at the drop of a hat in case they go and, climb a tree and stop a bypass. So why aren't you infiltrating and arresting the Nazis? Please. Thank you very much. Now, we do need to go on to the next story. So we're going to go to a topic closer to Darren's heart, which is, of course, footballers' wives. In particular, a libel battle between Colleen Rooney and Rebecca Vardy. Now, this all comes out of Colleen's allegations a year or two ago that Rebecca Vardy's account was the only one with access to hers when she was posting fake stories on her Instagram account to catch a snitch who was selling stuff to the Sun on her. Now, Rebecca declared her innocence and Colleen is not backing down. The hearing is expected to finish tomorrow. It's kind of like preparing for a trial, if you like, the proper trial in May, perhaps. Now, without wanting to be snobby, Darren, this is gripping stuff, because it's like a fight in a flat roof pub that spilled into the car park. And then because of the wealth of the people involved, it's then spilled into the High Court, which is even better. It's gripping to watch. But without wanting to talk about legal culpability, because we don't want to do that, about who did what to whom, what's going to happen, do you think, in the court of public opinion? Who's going to win this hair pulling contest?
Well, first of all, I love the fact that you said it's a story closer to my heart. So I've got my glass up against the window, up against the wall, listening to.
You're a football writer, Darren. You know what's going on.
Well, the thing is that this actually isn't about football. This is about lies. This is about from one side or the other. We don't know who's telling them, but someone would appear not to be telling the truth. This is about bad blood. I think you summed it up very well, actually. It is legal hair pulling. And some of the language that's being used, I've been quite struck by between women. And I know lots of our viewers now will hit me over the head and say how patronizing, but it's language that would raise our eyebrows, whether it was women or men. It's really, really nasty, vicious. Quite clearly that there won't be anyone kissing and making up at the end of this. What I would say is this: Colleen Rooney's appears to have been very forensic, both in the way that she has gathered what she believes is the evidence to back up her case, and it's quite interesting that we have seen, and I'm sure I'm not getting into trouble when I say this because this has been widely reported, that there is alarm on the side of the Rooneys that attempts to download information from the Vardy's phone have failed because a phone was dropped into the North Sea.
That's it. Rebecca Vardy's agent, shortly after the court said they wanted to look at her phone, happened to be on a boat in the North Sea, got hit by a freak wave. Whoopsie daisy, it's gone over the side. Very, very unfortunate, I think.
Very unfortunate.
Sure, the agent was very upset about that.
I have no idea how that could have happened, and I couldn't begin to speculate one way or the other.
No, I can remember an expense claim I filed once about how I needed a new coat on a trip to Africa. I had put in a receipt for something, and I said that the previous one got trampled by a hippo, which was true, of course.
How long did you keep a straight face for?
I can keep a straight face over this one because it would be wrong to file an incorrect expense claim, Darren. But there were hippos. Things did get trampled, and the managing editor at the time did not believe me, and I'm still upset about that.
But were you surprised that he didn't believe you?
No, I wasn't surprised. I expected a discussion, but it was on the back page of the expense claim that was like this long because I've been in Africa for a couple of weeks. So I thought I might get away with it. Anyway, moving on. We have to see what happens with Rebecca and Colleen. Now, there is some good news in the world. We've managed to hunt for it, and you wouldn't think this is good news on the surface, but it is actually if we get to it. And here it is. Now, football fans have a reputation, sometimes deserved, for, shall we say, rudeness, violence at times, hooliganism even. But last night, when Kurt Zouma joined the starting lineup for a match of West Ham against Watford, just hours after being revealed as someone who would much rather kick his cat across the kitchen floor, the fans did Britain proud. Probably the Watford fans, but maybe some of the Hammers joined in as well. There were chants, there were boos. My favourite, Darren, was when Zouma was fouled, they all sang, "That's how your cat feels," which I think is rather marvellous. But is this proof that football fans they've been wrongly maligned and they might display some poor behaviour at times, but they draw a line at animal abuse, Darren, and that does prove that they've got a heart.
It does indeed.
That's not the actual cat, by the way. That is... We still don't know how Zouma's cat is. That's just a cat that looks similar.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, because we saw, I don't know if you saw, but on TV, there was another match, a separate match where a cat strayed onto the pitch and a footballer chased him and just took his time and the game was stopped. And he worked incredibly hard to just make sure that he was safe, picked him up, handed him over to someone else. And there was a big round of applause around the stadium. By contrast, at West Ham, yeah, you're right. Zouma felt the force of not just the Watford fans, the opposition team in their way in, but the West Ham fans as well, who joined in the booing. And as you say, there was that chant, "That's how your cat feels," when he had quite a meaty challenge that left him in agony.
There was also some other choice ones. There was RSPCA. The YMCA. If it wasn't, it should have been. He kicks his effing cat, and a few others that we can't really repeat.
But you know, Susie, I think the great thing about it is because I don't know if you recall, 12 months ago, the racehorse trainer Gordon Elliott was pictured sitting on a dead horse. I don't know if you remember that. And
yes,
there was
I remember.
Absolute uproar. And Gordon Elliott, for people who don't know, he's one of the most successful trainers in horse racing in Britain. And he was banned, and the anger spilled over into several days. And basically, we are an animal-loving country, and there are 10 million people with pets in this country, and they all treat them in a warm, loving, caring way. I have to say, I haven't come across anything like this in 22 years in football, and I've come across all sorts of things, but never a story like this where a footballer has acted that way towards a cat. Just to say, lots of people are upset that Zuma played. So I just want to explain something so that they understand this. The Met Police decided they didn't want to charge him with anything. The RSPCA for me was surprised. The RSPCA were surprisingly lukewarm. I thought they would have been absolutely foaming at the mouth, but they were approached and their position wasn't particularly strong. So they left it to the club to decide what they wanted to do. And if you ask a club whether they want to play their best player, they will always say yes. So that's the reason why he played. And
right. Well, as Chris Packham was pointing out on the radio this morning, if a footballer had been caught committing any other kind of crime on mobile phone in his own home, whether it's taking drugs, whether it's hitting his kids, whether it's beating his wife, whether it's committing any other kind of offence, and this was an offence, there's no way that he would have played. And there is no way, really. Imagine if Zuma had been caught smacking his kid, and to be honest, around the head like that, or kicking him across the kitchen floor. Because to be honest, there is no difference. Sorry, good news has taken a turn for the sour, everybody. But there is a lot of difference, or no difference. Sorry, a lot of similarities between hurting an animal which is smaller and weaker than you, reliant upon you and unable to fight back, and doing the same thing to a child. The two are often connected. The two are often seen in the same place. And if you can hurt an animal and have that lack of empathy to know how that animal would feel and to know that it is wrong, then you can potentially have a similar response to children, because they're weaker than you, they're reliant on you, they're smaller than you, it shouldn't happen, etc. And you can say that animals don't have the same value as people. I don't disagree with that necessarily, but if you can hurt an animal, then you are capable of hurting a child.
I think we disagree on that. I think that I can understand the level of anger towards you're absolutely right about the poor defenseless animal and the fact that it can't fight back. But I also think that it's hard for me as an individual. Lots of people will have different opinions watching this, but it's hard for me to make the connection between doing that, which was a horrendous, reprehensible action, but then making the leap towards doing the same thing towards a human.
Well, we should say that I'm not suggesting that Zuma's in any way abusive to his child, but there was a child present during that violence, which there shouldn't have been. And I would say that splitting the two is a bit like saying that hitting your wife is okay, but hitting a strange woman in the street isn't.
But I think in both cases we're talking about humans, and I don't think that there is a correlation between hitting an animal and hitting a human. I have to stress, because I know lots of people will watch this and extrapolate from what I've just said, it's okay. And at no level whatsoever am I defending Kurt Zuma. What he did was simply reprehensible. But what I'm also pleased about is that we've kept a sense of proportion, certainly in the way that we've reported it. Because to look at social media yesterday, you would have thought it would dominate every single front page, and it hasn't. There is a bigger picture, and it's possible to be outraged about that, but realize that there are other things that are going on. And I looked across all of the front pages in what obviously metaphorically Fleet Street, and only one has a Zuma story on the front page, and the rest have it either inside or in the back pages. And that's because we are a nation of animal lovers, and we do have a very, very strong feelings towards animals. But I do fear that the social media reaction yesterday was kind of reaching a crescendo, and there's a lot of anger when I expected the RSPCA to be leading it, and they weren't.
Well, they won't if it's not on the front pages, but I'll tell you something, Darren. It's because it's a cat that it's on the inside pages and the back pages. If it was a dog or a puppy, there'd be people marching. Anyway, we have to sort of wait for the comments about how cruel I am to cats.
You're not cruel at all.
No one wants to hurt a cat, but people feel even more strongly about puppies, I would suggest. Anyway, thank you for joining me, Darren. Thank you everyone for taking part. And we will see you again next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. In the meantime, well done, Watford fans, and come on the RSPCA, sort yourselves out. Bye-bye, everybody.